Usually when you open a comic book, the lines are drawn pretty clearly.
Right, yeah. You've got the hero in spandex, the glowing space rock, the secret high-tech city.
Exactly. And it stays safely within the borders of the page. It's categorized neatly as pure fantasy. It is just an escape from the daily grind.
Well, we definitely like our modern mythology to remain comfortably fictional. I mean, it is just easier to digest when the stakes aren't real.
Totally. But then you pull back the curtain on a character like Black Panther, and suddenly that brightly colored ink starts bleeding right into the real world.
It really does.
Yeah, we are looking at a fictional landscape that acts as this profound mirror, reflecting our own very real, very complex world. It's the absolute definition of a pop culture Trojan horse.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, because it looks like a superhero story, but inside it is carrying these massive historical and scientific truths. So, welcome to our deep dive. Today we are on a mission to explore exactly that.
Yes. How a comic book superhero serves as this incredibly fascinating bridge between pop culture mythology, real-world physics, African history, and the future of global science.
And to do that, we have an amazing stack of sources.
We really do. Instead of just looking at, standard comic reviews, we are pulling from hard academic papers in the KNW Journal exploring Afrofuturism.
Which is fascinating stuff.
It is. Plus research from USC Dornsife about science role models, a literal physics breakdown from Film Threat, a geography researcher's review from Science and Film, and the comprehensive Wikipedia history charting the character's decades-long evolution.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Wakanda might be a fictional African nation, but the science underlying it, the history of its isolationism, and the cultural impact of the Black Panther are incredibly real.
Very real.
In fact, they directly shape the technology you, the person listening to this right now, use every single day. But before we can understand the advanced society of Wakanda, we really have to look at the literal foundation it was built upon.
Right, the meteorite.
Yes, the entire mythos starts with a meteorite from space. In the lore, a meteorite deposited the fictional metal Vibranium in Wakanda, giving them this massive technological leap.
Which has some crazy historical parallels.
It does. Now, I know a bit about human history in the Bronze Age, and, you're mostly mixing copper and tin.
Right, exactly.
But to get iron, you need intense heat and carbon, which early ancient societies just didn't have.
No, they absolutely did not.
So if we are seeing historical records of people wielding iron daggers way back in 1350 BC, long before humans figured out how to smelt iron ore, they aren't smelting it. They must be finding it already made.
Yeah, they were finding it literally falling from the sky.
That is wild.
It really is. Long before humanity figured out how to heat iron ore in the presence of carbon, which, by the way, didn't happen until around 1100 BC, ancient humans were already forging weapons and jewelry out of iron meteorites.
Which completely upends how we usually think of human progress, right?
Entirely. I mean, we categorize our history into these neat sequential eras: the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. But the reality is much stranger.
So what do the sources say about these real-world examples?
Well, they point to some incredible finds that defy that standard timeline. Take the Gürtze beads, for instance.
Okay, what are those?
This is an Egyptian necklace dating all the way back to 3200 BC, and it is made of meteoric iron.
Wait, 3200 BC?
Yeah. And researchers know for a fact it is from space because of the uniquely high nickel and cobalt content, which you just don't find in standard terrestrial iron ore.
Oh, wow. That is amazing.
And then you have King Tut, buried in 1350 BC, with this stunning dagger made of the exact same meteoric material.
Finding a meteorite like that in the Bronze Age or even the Stone Age would be like an ancient society discovering a cosmic loot drop.
A cosmic loot drop, yeah.
Right. It is a sudden alien technological upgrade that completely shatters the normal, steady progression of history. You literally go from swinging a rock to wielding a metal forged in the heart of a dying star.
A cosmic loot drop is the perfect analogy. And we actually see this play out dramatically in Greenland.
Oh, really? What happened there?
So the Inuit people there mined the massive Cape York meteorite for centuries. They cold forged it to make metal harpoons and cutting tools.
So they just skipped the Bronze Age?
Essentially, yeah. They bypassed the entire Bronze Age because the universe literally dropped tons of workable iron right into their laps.
That is mind-blowing. But of course, whenever there is a resource that valuable, someone else is going to want it.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the historical parallel here perfectly mirrors the Black Panther story, and it is quite dark.
Right, because of what happened next.
Exactly. In almost all of these real-world cases, from the Cape York meteorite in Greenland to the massive Hoba meteorite found in Namibia and others across the African continent. European colonialists eventually arrived.
And they didn't just leave them there.
No, they did not. When they realized the scientific and cultural value of these cosmic resources, they simply took them from the native populations. They carted them off to museums or melted them down.
Wow. So the Wakandan motivation is entirely justified by our actual history.
100%.
They knew that if the outside world found out about their cosmic loot, dropped their vibranium, it would be stolen and exploited. So they hid it.
Which is completely rational.
Right. But if you are going to hide a space rock and build your entire civilization around it, it has to do something fundamentally incredible.
And vibranium definitely does.
Yeah, in the movies, we see the Black Panther suit glowing purple as it absorbs a blow from a weapon, or we see Wakandan border security weaving vibranium into their Basotho blankets to act as energy shields. It absorbs and redirects kinetic energy.
Right.
So I have to ask, how does the science of vibranium actually stack up against real-world physics?
Well, the underlying concept is actually completely grounded in a real physical mechanism called the piezoelectric effect.
The piezoelectric effect. Okay, how does that work?
This occurs when certain materials, like specific crystals or ceramics, generate an electric current when they are put under mechanical stress.
So if you hit them.
Exactly. If you squeeze them or hit them, the internal structure of the material is forced to deform. And that deformation shifts the positive and negative charges inside the material's crystal lattice, which instantly generates an electric field.
That sounds like sci-fi, but that's real.
It is entirely real.
Yeah.
It is not theoretical at all. In fact, it's exactly how an everyday electric cigarette lighter works.
Wait, really? Just a standard lighter?
Yep. A little mechanical hammer strikes a piezoelectric crystal inside the lighter. The sudden stress generates a high enough voltage to create a spark, and that spark ignites the gas.
Okay, I have to push back here because there is a massive leap in scale, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Because squeezing a crystal to create a tiny spark in a lighter or using it as a microphone pickup makes complete sense. But absorbing a barrage of heavy artillery, storing that kinetic energy, and then using it to let T-Shell physically flip a 2-ton car.
Yeah, that's where the physics gets tricky.
Right, because piezoelectricity only generates a tiny amount of electricity and it dissipates almost immediately. So where is all that energy actually going, or is that purely comic book magic?
You've zeroed in on the exact limitation of the piezoelectric effect. To flip a car, you need to store massive, sustained amounts of energy, not just create a quick spark.
Right. So how does the film justify it?
The physics breakdown from our sources suggests that to make vibranium work in reality, it would have to utilize advanced induction combined with nanotechnology.
Okay, so how does induction actually solve the storage problem?
Well, induction involves moving magnetic fields to generate electricity. So imagine the vibranium suit isn't just a solid piece of metal, but a microscopic web of magnetic coils.
Okay, I'm picturing that.
When a bullet hits the suit, the kinetic impact compresses those coils. That movement generates a massive electric current. But instead of letting that current dissipate, the suit would need to act like a supercapacitor.
Using the nanotech.
Exactly. It would use nanotechnology that instantly rearranges its own molecular structure to distribute and hold that force, almost like a coiled spring locking into place until the wearer chooses to release it.
Okay, that makes so much more sense. It is not just a magic metal. It's an impossibly advanced mechanical system at the microscopic level.
Right. It's engineering, not magic.
But geopolitically, the real-world equivalent of vibranium isn't about magical energy absorption or superhero suits, is it?
No, not at all.
It is about something we call rare earth elements.
Yes, these are the elements sitting inside the smartphone or laptop you're using to listen to this deep dive right now.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Rare earth elements are the absolute backbone of modern technology. Smartphones, wind turbines, hybrid car batteries, the guidance systems in military fighter jets, they all depend entirely on these specific metals.
But they aren't actually rare, are they?
Impartially speaking, no. The term rare earth is a bit of a misnomer. These metals aren't actually rare in the Earth's crust, they're relatively abundant.
So why is there so much conflict over them?
The global tension comes from how incredibly difficult they are to extract and separate, which creates massive supply bottlenecks. Right now, upwards of 90% of global rare earth production is concentrated in China.
Wow, 90%.
Yeah. And historically, the global pursuit of these highly complex resources has driven extractivism, environmental degradation, and conflict in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
It is the ultimate modern paradox, right?
How so?
Well, the technologies we brand as green, like those massive offshore wind turbines or electric cars, they often depend on incredibly environmentally destructive and socially exploitative mining practices just to get those rare earths out of the ground in the first place.
That is a very valid point. And the cultural crossover here is so relevant that an American company designing the 800-mile-per-hour Hyperloop literally named their new sensor-embedded carbon fiber material Vibranium.
No way. They actually called it vibranium.
They really did.
Yeah.
It just proves how deeply the pop culture mythos has infiltrated actual engineering and material science.
That is incredible. But this brutal reality of how the world fights over rare, vital resources perfectly explains Wakanda's most defining geopolitical strategy.
Which is absolute, total isolation.
Right. Because Wakanda didn't just hide the vibranium in a vault. They hid their entire civilization behind a holographic canopy. They erased themselves from the global map entirely.
They chose to disappear to avoid the fate of other resource-rich nations. And history shows us exactly why they would make that choice.
What's a good historical example of that?
The sources bring up the devastating real-world example of Rapa Nui, which is also known as Easter Island.
Oh, right.
This was a highly advanced society. They had an incredible division of labor, complex agricultural systems, and really sophisticated oceanic navigation.
But then they made contact.
Exactly.
Yeah.
After contact with European colonizers in the 1700s, the introduction of foreign diseases and brutal slavery raids completely decimated their population and societal structure.
How bad was the population drop?
A thriving society of around 3,000 people was reduced to just 111 individuals by 1877.
111 people. That is, that isn't just a decline. That is an apocalyptic societal collapse.
It really is.
When you look at those numbers, Wakanda's fear of the outside world is completely rationally justified.
Totally. And the closest real-world parallel to Wakanda's successful secrecy is Japan's Sakoku period, which lasted from the 1630s all the way to 1853.
Oh, the closed country policy.
Yes, the Japanese shogunate enacted a strict closed country policy. Leaving the country, or unauthorized entry by foreigners, literally meant the death penalty.
Wow, they were not messing around.
No, they weren't. But because of that extreme and forced isolation, Japan actually prospered internally.
Really?
Yeah, they successfully resisted the wave of European colonialism sweeping the globe. They developed a highly sustainable agricultural trade, built massive peaceful cities, and fostered their own incredibly unique art and print culture.
Until the Americans showed up, right?
Exactly. They were entirely undisturbed until American Commodore Perry arrived with heavily armed warships to physically force their ports open.
Man, that dynamic sets up the central ideological conflict of the Black Panther story perfectly.
It really is the core of the whole narrative.
Right. You have T'Challa, who looks at history and wants to maintain this isolation to protect his people's unique culture and lives.
Yes.
And then you have the antagonist, Killmonger, who looks at the systemic oppression of Black people around the globe and argues that Wakanda has a moral imperative to end its isolation. He wants to distribute their advanced vibranium technology to support global liberation movements.
It is a profoundly complex debate, and our sources analyze it without taking a side on their respective methods.
Which makes such a great story.
Absolutely. The core ideological tug-of-war is deeply compelling because both sides are reacting to the trauma of extractivism. On one hand, isolationism effectively preserves a culture from exploitation, theft, and destruction. But on the other hand, isolationism inherently means you are hoarding life-saving technology, medical advancement, and clean energy resources from a world that is actively suffering.
It makes you wonder if true isolationism is even possible today.
In our modern world? It's a tough question.
Yeah, we obviously don't have magical holographic canopies hiding entire countries, but modern hidden Wakandas absolutely exist in the form of classified government technology.
Oh, like black budget programs.
Exactly. Think about it. Spy satellites with optical tech decades ahead of what the public has, stealth jets, classified nuclear programs. The technology exists, but it's deliberately siloed away from the public sector.
That's a really interesting point.
Is government secrecy the only real armor a nation has left in a hyper-connected, globalized world?
And, this raises a fundamental question about how we even define technological advancement in the first place.
How do you mean?
Well, Wakanda doesn't just hide its technology from the globe. It approaches the very concept of science from a fundamentally different cultural perspective.
Yes. because this is where the concept of Afrofuturism completely challenges our basic definition of what science actually
It
is.
is a massive paradigm shift.
There is this incredibly memorable scene in the film where the CIA agent, Everett Ross, wakes up in Wakanda after taking a bullet to the spine. He's completely healed, he's walking around, and he assumes he's witnessing some kind of ancient magic.
Right, you can't process it.
And T'Challa's sister, Shuri, just rolls her eyes, quips about having to fix another broken white boy, and specifically clarifies to him it was done not by magic, by technology.
That specific line is a brilliant surgical critique of what historians call the Hall of Mirrors concept in Western science studies.
The Hall of Mirrors, what is that?
Historically, European imperialists defined science and technology incredibly narrowly. When they looked at other cultures, they were essentially looking into a funhouse mirror, hoping to see a reflection of their own industrial revolution.
So they were looking for very specific things.
Exactly. They were looking for smokestacks, brick factories, and steel mills.
Yeah.
When they didn't see those specific European markers, they assumed there was no science happening at all.
Just because it didn't look like their science.
Right. They looked right at complex, highly effective indigenous systems and completely dismissed them as primitive superstition or magic, completely blinding themselves to the reality in front of them.
But the irony is, while they were dismissing it as magic, those same colonizers were utterly dependent on that exact indigenous science just to survive their own expeditions.
Oh, the historical record is full of this. For example, in Ghana, European colonial populations were being absolutely decimated by malaria. They had no idea how to treat it.
None at all.
None. It was the Ghanaians who possessed the deep botanical science, utilizing native plants like Kaya senegalensis to effectively treat the disease.
Wow. So they had the cure all along.
Yes. And in southern Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, the colonial government was entirely baffled by how to manage the deadly tsetse fly populations that were wiping out their livestock.
Let me guess. The locals knew what to do.
Exactly. They had to rely entirely on the deep ecological knowledge and land management strategies of African hunters to navigate and survive the region. The colonizers survived because of African science.
So the rigorous, observable science was always there. It just wasn't wearing a white lab coat and operating out of a brick university.
Exactly. And in the post-colonial era, African leaders recognized that they needed to forcibly shatter that hall of mirrors. They needed to forge a new socio-technical identity that the rest of the world couldn't ignore.
How did they do that?
Well, in the 1960s, Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, pushed for massive, highly visible infrastructure projects, most notably the Akasambo Dam.
Okay, a huge dam.
Yes, he wanted to forge a socio-technical imaginary of Pan-African liberation. The goal was to use monumental, undeniable engineering to prove on a global stage that an independent African nation was a modern technological powerhouse capable of matching any Western achievement.
And that real-world history perfectly bridges the gap into the literary world of Afrofuturism.
It really does lay the groundwork for it.
Because authors in this genre like Nnedi Okorafor and Deji Olukotin, they take this idea of redefining science and just run with it. They completely evade the Western boundary that rigidly separates magic and technology.
Okorafor's work is a perfect example of this.
Yeah, in her incredible Binti series, there is a character who performs complex fractal mathematics in her head to enter a deep, altered trance state. And in the book, this mathematical process is called treeing.
And to a traditional Western observer in that fictional universe, treeing looks entirely mystical. It involves swaying, chanting, and losing connection with the physical world. It looks exactly like a spiritual ritual.
But if you think about the actual mechanism of what she's doing, it's just a different cultural framing for a very real cognitive process.
How so?
Well, comparing treeing to a modern computer programmer entering a flow state makes perfect sense. Think about it. When a coder puts on their noise-canceling headphones, zones out the entire physical world, and writes thousands of lines of complex logic in a continuous, uninterrupted trance.
Right. They're completely checked out.
Yeah. And to an outsider who doesn't understand code, it looks like modern magic. They are speaking a weird language that makes machines come to life.
That's a great comparison.
But to the programmer, it is a highly disciplined, intensely rigorous application of mathematics and logic. Afrofuturism is simply giving us permission to view that exact same rigorous logic through a non-Western cultural lens.
It completely removes the Eurocentric filter. But that Afrofuturist lens doesn't just stay inside the fictional world of a novel or a comic book. It actually dictates who gets to hold the pen in the real world and who gets to see themselves as a scientist.
Which brings us to the history of the Black Panther comic itself, which is a wild ride of cultural evolution.
It really is.
The character was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby back in 1966, making his first appearance in Fantastic Four number 52. And honestly, in those early days, he was heavily bogged down by problematic tropes.
Yeah, the early representation was definitely flawed.
He functioned almost as a magical Negro guest star, you know? This unfathomably perfect, exotic, wealthy king who would occasionally show up just to help the white heroes solve their problems.
The evolution happened because a series of brilliant black writers eventually took ownership of the character and systematically evolved him into something profoundly complex.
Like who?
Well, rather than just listing names, look at how the narratives fundamentally shifted. Christopher Priest took over the comic and completely reinvented this series as a sharp geopolitical satire.
Oh, nice.
He introduced the Dora Milaje and framed T'Challa not just as a guy who punches bad guys, but as a brilliant, calculating head of state dealing with global espionage.
And then Ta-Nehisi Coates had a run, right?
Yes, later, Ta-Nehisi Coates deconstructed the entire Wakandan monarchy. He started questioning the morality of a single king hoarding power and actually steered the narrative toward a constitutional democracy.
But through all those iterations across decades of different writers pulling the character in different philosophical directions, the one core consistency has always been this T'Challa, and eventually his sister Shuri, are peerless scientists.
Always.
They aren't just physically strong, they are consistently written as the smartest people in the room, out-engineering the brightest minds the West has to offer.
And the real-world implications of that specific type of representation are massive. One of the academic sources brings up a beautiful real-world story to demonstrate exactly why we need a geographically and culturally diverse scientific community.
Oh, the astronomy story.
Yes. Recently, there was a massive astronomical discovery involving the LIGO and Virgo observatories detecting a neutron star merger. It was a massive global effort. But a crucial piece of the puzzle, a specific light spectrum caught hours before anyone else saw it, came from African astronomers.
And it wasn't just luck, right? Explain why their specific location mattered so much.
It came down to geography and the Earth's rotation. The massive telescopes in the United States and Europe literally couldn't see that part of the sky at that exact moment.
Because they were facing the wrong way.
Exactly, because the Earth was turning. The African astronomers were geographically positioned to catch the light spectrum hours early. Their literal, physical perspective on the globe provided data that the West was entirely blind to.
That is so cool.
What's fascinating here is that science is demonstrably, mathematically better when it includes diverse perspectives and global infrastructure. But for decades, the pervasive media trope has been that high-level science is strictly reserved for white men in lab coats or people born with a special innate nerd gene.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is what researchers are calling the Shuri effect.
The Shuri effect, yes.
When young children, especially young black girls, see a character like Shuri on screen, when they see someone who looks like them casually wielding the most advanced technology on the planet, confidently mocking a CIA agent's lack of tech savvy, and saving the entire world with her brain instead of her fists,
It changes everything.
it completely erodes those crumbling tropes. I want you to reflect on that for a second. Imagine growing up and finally seeing a reflection of your own potential, not cast as a sidekick or a magical helper, but as the genius mastermind.
It entirely changes a child's career trajectory.
Exactly. It gives them the cultural permission to say, I belong in that lab. I can build that.
It acts as a cultural injection of possibility. By changing the mythological role models, you actively shift the entire global talent pool for the next generation of real-world scientific discovery. It is a profound testament to the power of speculative fiction.
It's wild to think about the journey we just took today. I mean, we started this deep dive by looking at a guy in a spandex catsuit debuting in a 1966 comic, and we ended up staring down the barrel of global rare earth resource conflicts, the historical decimation of isolated cultures, and the necessary decolonization of modern science.
It is a lot to take in, but it is all connected.
It is. And to you listening, Remember this, every single time you pick up your smartphone, every time you open a laptop, you are holding a tangible piece of this exact geopolitical struggle.
Absolutely.
The rare earth metals physically powering your device right now are the real-world vibranium. They are fueled by the exact same complex supply chains, extraction bottlenecks, and historical conflicts we've been discussing today.
And that reality leaves us with a final, very pungent thought to sit with.
What's that?
Well, we talked about how vibranium originated from a meteorite, right? A cosmic resource that fundamentally changed a society.
Right, the cosmic loot drop.
Exactly. Today, on Earth, the desperate extraction of rare earth elements causes immense geopolitical conflict and environmental destruction. Because of this, billionaire corporations and tech-heavy nations are actively developing the technologies for asteroid mining and deep ocean seabed extraction.
Wow, they're already looking off planet.
They are literally looking to the stars and the ocean floor for the next cosmic loot drop. So the question we have to ask ourselves is this: when humanity finally reaches out and grasps these supernatural celestial materials, will we use them to build a more equitable, balanced world, as Wakanda eventually strives to do? Or are we just preparing to export the exact same historical colonialism into the stars?
Wow. That is a heavy, entirely necessary thought to sit with. The lines of the comic book aren't just bleeding into our world, they are actively drawing the blueprint for our future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.